The chandeliers at the Langham Boston cost more than my car. I know this because I looked it up. The way I look everything up. The way I've looked everything up since Gerald died 14 years ago and left me alone with a daughter to raise, a mortgage to pay, and the very clear understanding that no one was going to hand me information I needed. You had to go find it yourself. So I sat at the bride's family table in my navy blue dress from Macy's. 40% off, end of season, still the nicest thing I owned. And I looked up at those chandeliers and I thought, this is what it looks like when people forget that money is a tool and start believing it's a personality. My name is Dorothy Hargrove. I'm 57 years old. I spent 30 years as a freelance accountant, mostly for small law firms and family businesses in Queens. I am 5'4". I have gray hair. I stopped fighting about 3 years ago, and I have exactly one talent that matters in this story. I can read a room the way other people read a book. Quickly, accurately, and with complete attention to what's written between the lines. The room I was reading that evening told me everything I needed to know. There were 280 guests at my daughter Lily's wedding. I knew maybe 12 of them. The rest belonged to the Whitmore world, a world of old Boston money, prep school handshakes, and the particular kind of cruelty that wears a smile so practiced it almost looks real. The flowers had been imported from the Netherlands. The string quartet in the corner played Vivaldi with the mechanical precision of people who had been paid very well and told exactly what to feel. Lily was 28 years old and the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I don't say that the way mothers usually say it. I say it the way you say a fact. She had her father Gerald's red hair and his kind eyes and my stubbornness, which I had always considered the best thing I'd ever given her. She stood next to her new husband at the far end of the room, wearing a gown that cost more than my first car, and she was smiling. But I knew my daughter's real smile. I had been watching it for 28 years. This was not it. This was the smile of a woman standing very still because she was afraid that if she moved, something would break. Everett Whitmore III, and yes, he used the third, he used it the way some men carry a weapon, stood beside her with his hand at the small of her back. He was 34, square-jawed, and handsome in that specific way that comes from generations of good nutrition and professional dental care. He smiled easily and often, and his smile never once reached his eyes. In 12 months of knowing him, I had never seen his eyes do anything except calculate. I had disliked him from the first dinner. I had kept it to myself because Lily was happy, or performing happiness so convincingly that the difference didn't matter yet. And because I was not the kind of mother who confuses her own instincts with her daughter's right to choose. But I had not been idle. I want to be clear about that. What happened that evening at the Langham was not a reaction. It was not a mother's desperate improvisation in a moment of crisis. It was the conclusion of 18 months of quiet, careful preparation. The kind of preparation that looks like nothing from the outside. The way the strongest foundations are always the ones you can't see. I had bought the house in Catskill 7 years ago, before Lily had ever met Everett Whitmore. An old Victorian on 3 acres, going for a song at a foreclosure auction because it needed everything. Roof, plumbing, wiring, floors, heart. I had spent 5 years of weekends driving up from Queens with a tool belt and bad coffee, and my brother Roy, who is a retired union carpenter and the best man I know. We fixed it board by board, room by room. I had imagined it as a retreat for myself someday, a place to go when Queens got loud and the city got heavy. Then Lily brought Everett home for Thanksgiving, and he shook my hand with both of his and looked around my apartment with the pleasant, empty expression of a man who has already categorized everything he sees. And I changed my mind about what the house in Catskill was for. 6 weeks before the wedding, I sat in the office of Howard Finch, a lawyer I'd done books for 15 years. A man who had seen enough family money wars to know exactly how they were fought. And I said, Howard, I need an irrevocable spendthrift trust. I need it airtight. I need it to hold up against people with a lot more money than me and a lot less scruple. Howard had looked at me over his reading glasses for a long moment. This about the Whitmore boy? He'd asked. It's about my daughter, I said. There's a difference. He built it like a vault. The property at 18 Sycamore Ridge Road, Catskill, New York, placed in an irrevocable spendthrift trust with Lily Ann Hargrove Whitmore as sole beneficiary. It could not be sold without her written consent. It could not be mortgaged. It could not be transferred. And in the event of a divorce, a word Howard had inserted with the quiet precision of a surgeon, it was excluded entirely from marital assets. I had the document in my handbag that evening. The small black beaded clutch that one of Everett's aunts had looked at with the faint pity of someone noticing a smudge on an otherwise acceptable surface. Nobody had looked at me all night. That was fine. Invisibility has its uses. Virginia Whitmore rose from her seat at the head table at exactly 8:47 in the evening. I know the time because I checked my watch when I saw her stand, a habit from 30 years of billing by the hour. You learn to note when things begin. She was 63 years old and dressed in Chanel white, not ivory, not cream, white, at her daughter-in-law's wedding. The message was so deliberate it was almost elegant in its rudeness. I am the standard here. Everything else is measured against me. She was beautiful in the way that very expensive, very controlled things are beautiful. Perfectly preserved, perfectly presented, with the careful blankness of a face that had learned long ago to show only what it intended. Her hair was silver and swept back. Her posture was the posture of a woman who had been told to stand straight so many times in childhood that it had become structural, like rebar in concrete. She tapped her champagne flute with a small silver spoon. The sound cut through the room like a blade. 280 people went quiet. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. "My darling Lily," Virginia began, and her voice was the voice of a woman who had chaired 100 charity galas, who had dismissed 100 household staff with a smile, who had spent 63 years learning to make cruelty sound like generosity. It carried effortlessly across the ballroom. "Welcome to the Whitmore family," a gentle wave of applause. "We are a family of traditions," she continued. "Standards, values that have been passed down through generations. And because you come to us from—" She paused, and in that pause was an entire taxonomy of condescension. "From a more modest background, I wanted to make sure you were properly equipped for your new role." She reached beneath the table and produced a box. It was wrapped in white linen, tied with a silk ribbon. It was the most beautiful wrapping I had ever seen on the most terrible gift I would ever witness. A server carried it to Lily. I watched my daughter's hands as she took it. They were trembling, not with excitement. I know the difference. She untied the ribbon, lifted the lid. The room was very quiet. Lily reached into the tissue paper and removed a white Victorian-style maid's apron, the kind with the structured bib and the long ties, the kind you see in period films about households where the help was meant to be invisible. Beneath it, a book, cloth-bound, old, the spine reading The Art of Household Management, published 1923. "So that you never forget," Virginia said, her smile serene, "that a wife's first duty is to the comfort and order of her husband's world. We wouldn't want you getting confused about your role, would we, darling? Just because you're wearing a Vera Wang gown today." There was laughter. It started at Virginia's table and moved outward in the particular rippling way of social fear. People laughing not because something was funny, but because laughing was safer than not laughing. Everett Whitmore III looked at his mother and nodded. Once, small, a nod of acknowledgement between people who had discussed this moment in advance. He had known. He had helped plan it. He had stood beside my daughter at the altar 3 hours earlier and promised to honor her. And then he had nodded at his mother's signal like a general confirming that a strike had landed on target. Lily stood holding the apron. Her face was a mask. Behind the mask, I knew, she was looking for an exit. She was looking for the floor to open up. She was looking for me. She found me. Our eyes met across the room. And the thing that woke up inside me in that moment was not rage. Rage is hot and imprecise, and it makes you loud and large and easy to dismiss. What woke up in me was something cold and quiet and very, very old. It was the thing that had kept me moving after Gerald died. The thing that had made me work double billing seasons and skip vacations and drive to Catskill on freezing February mornings to fix a stranger's broken house. It was the part of me that understood, at a cellular level, that some fights you have to prepare for before you know you're in them. I stood up. The scrape of my chair on the parquet floor was deliberate, loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to seem accidental. The laughter died. I walked across the ballroom floor with my small black beaded clutch in my hand, and I did not hurry, because hurrying is something you do when you're afraid, and I was not afraid. I had been afraid 14 years ago when the hospital called and told me Gerald was gone, and I had been afraid the night Lily was 3 years old and ran a fever of 104, and I had used up a great deal of my fear in those moments, and I found I had very little left for Virginia Whitmore. I stopped in front of the head table. "Virginia," I said. My voice was steady, the voice of a woman who had spent 30 years on the phone with lawyers. What a thoughtful gift. So practical. I turned to Lily. "I have something practical for you too, sweetheart," I said. "Open it." I reached into my small black handbag and removed the blue envelope, the one that had been sitting in Howard Finch's safe for 6 weeks, waiting for this exact moment, not because I had known Virginia would do something like this, but because I had known she would do something, and that something would be designed to establish the terms of Lily's life in the Whitmore world before Lily had a chance to understand what she was agreeing to. I placed the envelope in my daughter's hands. Lily looked at me. Then she looked at the envelope. Then she slid her finger under the seal and opened it, and removed the document inside and unfolded it. "Read it out loud, honey," I said quietly. Lily's voice shook at first. Then it steadied, the way a candle steadies when you cup your hands around it. "Deed of trust. Property, 18 Sycamore Ridge Road, Catskill, New York. Owner, Lily Ann Hargrove Whitmore. Sole beneficiary, Irrevocable Spendthrift Trust. This property cannot be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without the beneficiary's explicit written consent. In the event of dissolution of marriage, this property is excluded from marital assets and reverts solely to the named beneficiary." The silence that followed was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a room full of people recalibrating everything they thought they understood about what was happening. Everett's hand shot out. He took the document from Lily's hands, not gently, and read it himself. His jaw tightened. The pleasant, calculating blankness of his face cracked, just slightly, into something rawer. Something that looked very much like the expression of a man who has just realized that a move he did not see coming has been in play for a very long time. "A house," he said. He looked at me. The politeness in his voice was stretched thin as paper. "You bought her a house." "A farmhouse," I said. "It needs some work, but it's paid for, and it belongs to Lily. Only to Lily." "Why wasn't I—" "Because it's not yours, Everett," I said, and my voice was not unkind, and it was not loud, and it was absolutely final. "It's hers. It has always been hers. That's the point." I turned to Lily. "Marriage is a partnership," I said. "You are a bride today, not a maid. And you own that house so that you will always have a place that is entirely, completely, unconditionally yours." I kissed her cheek. I walked back to my table. I sat down. I picked up my water glass. My hand was perfectly steady. Across the room, Virginia Whitmore was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. It was not anger, exactly. It was the expression of a woman who had just encountered something she had not prepared for, which, I suspected, had not happened to her in a very long time. My brother Roy, sitting 2 seats down, leaned over and spoke quietly into my ear. "Dot," he said, "you just declared war." "No," I said, watching Lily slowly, carefully, fold the deed and hold it against her chest. "I just made sure she has somewhere to go if the war comes to her." The rest of the reception was a study in the particular social mechanics of old money under pressure. Virginia's inner circle, 4 women in expensive jewelry and careful expressions, clustered around her table like a weather system reorganizing after a disruption. Everett spent 20 minutes in a corner with Lily, and I watched through the reflection in a decorative mirror as my daughter nodded repeatedly, the small, rapid nods of someone apologizing for something they didn't do. When she came back to the dance floor, she was smiling again. The wrong smile. Roy drove me home. It was past midnight by the time we crossed the Triborough Bridge and Queens spread out below us, ordinary and lit and mine. "How long have you been planning that?" he asked. 18 months, I said. He was quiet for a moment. "And if he turns out to be fine?" Roy said. "If it's just a rich family being snobby and he actually treats her right?" "Then she owns a farmhouse in Catskill and nothing is lost," I said. "But Roy, did you see him nod when Virginia gave her that apron? He knew. He planned it with her." Roy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't say anything else. I looked out the window at the city. I thought about the document now tucked into Lily's bodice. She had put it there herself, quietly, while Everett was looking away. I had seen her do it. A small private act of self-preservation. The seed had been planted. Whether it would take root depended on things I couldn't control. I went home and I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat at my kitchen table in Queens, and I made a note in the small spiral notebook I kept for important dates. September 14th. Deed delivered. Lily received it. She put it close to her heart. The months that followed taught me that Everett Whitmore III was patient. He did not move suddenly or obviously. He moved the way erosion moves, gradually, consistently, in a direction you only fully recognize when you look back and realize the landscape has completely changed. In October, Lily missed our Sunday dinner for the first time in 28 years. The reason, delivered by text, Everett made reservations at a friend's restaurant. "So sorry, Mom, next week." Next week she came, but she was distracted and checked her phone 4 times and left 40 minutes early because Everett had planned something. A gallery opening, a client dinner, something important that had apparently just come up. In November, she started returning my calls hours later than usual. Then the next day. Then not at all. Just texts, brief and careful, the texts of someone composing messages for an audience she knew existed. All good. Busy week. Talk soon. In December, I drove to their apartment in Back Bay and rang the buzzer. The doorman, a young man named Pete, who I had tipped generously at the wedding and who had always smiled when he saw me, looked at me with an expression of pained apology. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, and his voice was very quiet. "Mr. Whitmore left instructions. Mrs. Whitmore isn't receiving visitors at the moment. She's resting." I stood on the sidewalk of Back Bay in December cold, and I looked up at the windows of the penthouse. They were dark. I took out my phone. I opened the notes application. December 19th. Blocked at door by Everett's standing instruction. Pete apologetic. Window dark. Lily not responding to calls. I did not panic. Panic is the enemy of preparation, and preparation was the only weapon I had. I drove home to Queens, made a cup of tea, and called Howard Finch. "The trust is solid?" I asked. "Dorothy," Howard said. "I built that thing to survive a siege." "Good," I said. "I think the siege might be starting." The postcard arrived on a Tuesday in April. I know it was Tuesday because I pick up my mail on Tuesdays and Fridays, a habit from the years when bills came on paper and bad news traveled by envelope. The postcard was tucked between a utility statement and a grocery circular, hand-addressed in Lily's handwriting, the handwriting I had watched develop from crayon loops to careful cursive over 28 years. No return address. I turned it over at the mailbox, standing in the thin April light in front of my building in Queens, and I read it twice before I went inside. "Mom, I have a baby coming. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Please don't call. He checks the call log." That was all. I stood at my kitchen table and I read it a 3rd time. Then I set it down very carefully, the way you set down something fragile, even though it was just a postcard, even though the damage it contained had already been done somewhere far from here, in a penthouse in Back Bay where my daughter was apparently afraid to use her own telephone. I allowed myself 4 minutes. I have learned over the years to budget grief the way you budget money. Not because the feeling isn't real, but because you cannot afford to let it run. Gerald's death had taught me that. You feel it, fully, and then you fold it into something useful because the alternative is drowning, and drowning doesn't help anyone. 4 minutes. Then I picked up the phone and called Howard Finch. "Howard, the trust. If someone tried to challenge it on grounds of fraudulent intent, what would they need to prove?" I heard him settle back in his chair, the familiar creak of old leather. "They'd need to demonstrate that you created it specifically to defraud a future creditor or spouse," he said. "Which they can't, because you created it 2 years before Lily and Everett got engaged. The timeline alone kills that argument. Why? Is someone sniffing around it?" "Not yet," I said. "But I want to know exactly how strong the walls are before someone starts testing them." "Dorothy," Howard said, "I've been practicing family law for 31 years. That trust is the best thing I've ever built. I put everything I know into it. It will hold." "Good," I said. "Thank you, Howard." I hung up and called Roy. "She's pregnant," I said when he answered. A long pause. "How do you know?" he said. "She sent a postcard. She's scared, Roy. She said he checks her call log." Another pause. I could hear Roy breathing, the slow, deliberate breath of a man controlling something large. "What do you need me to do?" he said. "Nothing yet," I said. "Be ready." "Ready for what?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But when I know, I'll need you fast." 1 week later, Lily came to Queens. She took the subway. She told me this herself later, that she had taken the subway because Everett monitored the Uber account, and she had paid for the fare in cash from a small emergency fund she had been building in an envelope inside a copy of Middlemarch on the bookshelf, $20 at a time, for 4 months. My daughter, who had grown up watching me balance ledgers and stretch paychecks, had learned to hide money in a book. Some lessons pass between mothers and daughters without ever being spoken aloud. She looked wrong when I opened the door. That is the only word for it. She was wearing her good coat and her hair was brushed, and from 3 feet away she looked like herself. But I am her mother, and I have been reading her face since the morning she was born, and something behind her eyes had gone flat and careful, in the way that eyes go flat and careful when they have been watching for danger for a long time. I made tea. I put a plate of the shortbread cookies she had loved since she was 7 years old on the table between us, and I sat down, and I waited. She told me about the baby first, how she had found out 6 weeks ago, how she had sat with it alone for 3 days before telling Everett because she needed those 3 days to be happy privately, in a place he couldn't reach, how he had opened a bottle of vintage Burgundy when she told him and made a toast, and how the toast had been, she searched for the right word, transactional, like a business announcement. We are expanding. Then she told me about the conditions. She laid them out in a flat, steady voice, the voice of someone who has rehearsed saying something terrible so many times that the rehearsal has worn the emotion smooth. 3 conditions. Delivered by Everett, 2 weeks after the pregnancy announcement on a Sunday evening, while they ate dinner at the glass table in the penthouse where everything was clean and cold and designed to reflect light without generating warmth. 1. She would leave her job at the publishing house at the end of the 2nd trimester. The work was too stressful for the baby, he said. The salary was negligible. Her time and energy belonged to their child. 2. She would agree to sell the farmhouse in Catskill. He had already found a buyer. The proceeds, his word, proceeds, as though it were a transaction he had already mentally completed, would go into their joint investment account to be managed by Everett. 3. She would reduce contact with me to monthly, supervised, his word again, supervised, visits. I was, he had explained with the measured reasonableness of a man who has practiced sounding measured, a destabilizing influence. I had demonstrated at the wedding that I did not respect the Whitmore family structure. He would not have his child raised in the orbit of that energy. He had delivered all 3 conditions in the same tone one might use to discuss a change in insurance coverage. Then he had refilled his wineglass and asked if she wanted dessert. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, she looked at me with the exhausted eyes of someone who has been treading water for months and has finally admitted they are tired. He said if I don't agree, if I fight him on any of it, he'll take the baby, Mom. He said his family has lawyers who do this for a living. He said he'll tell the court I'm unstable. He said, her voice broke just slightly, then steadied. He said I'm not mentally equipped to be the primary parent. He said a judge would see that. I was quiet for a long moment. Outside my kitchen window, a pigeon landed on the fire escape and regarded me with the blank philosophical calm of a creature that has decided all human problems are equally irrelevant. Lily, I said, look at me. She looked at me. He cannot sell that house, I said. That is not a hope or a plan. That is a legal fact. The trust Howard built is specifically designed to withstand this exact conversation. Everett knows that. He is not trying to sell the house. He is trying to make you believe he can sell the house, because if you believe it, you'll give it to him voluntarily, which is the only way he can actually get it. She was quiet. He wants your exit strategy, I said. Not the house, the exit. Because if you have a place to go, a place that is legally completely yours, then he cannot make you feel as trapped as he needs you to feel. Do you understand the difference? A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. He says you manipulated me, she said softly. At the wedding, he says you came in and made a scene and embarrassed his family because you're jealous of what they have. I know that's what he says, I said. Is it true? I looked at my daughter for a long moment. 28 years of her face, the red hair from Gerald, the stubbornness from me, the kindness that belonged to neither of us and both of us at once. I am not jealous of anything the Whitmore family has, I said. I built what I have with my own hands, and I sleep well, and I have never once in my life locked a door to keep someone in. Something moved across her face. Not quite resolution, the beginning of it. I told her what to do. It was the hardest thing I had said out loud since the night I told 14-year-old Lily that her father wasn't coming home. I told her to go back and not sign anything. To tell Everett that the trust required a mandatory 2-year legal review period before any modification could be made, which was not entirely true but was not entirely false either, and would buy time. To keep her job as long as she could. To hold her ground inch by inch. "And call me," I said. "Whenever you can, however you can." She nodded. She ate 3 shortbread cookies, which I took as a good sign. She hugged me at the door for a long time, longer than she had hugged me in years, the full-body hug of a child who still remembers that her mother is the safest place she knows. Then she went back. The silence that followed lasted 4 months. I marked time by the absence of her. Sunday dinners eaten alone. Calls that rang and went to voicemail. Texts that came back brief and managed, and nothing like my daughter's voice. In June, I received a message that read, "All good. Baby is healthy. Everett and I are working through some things. Please give us space. Love you." The punctuation was too careful. Lily had never used an exclamation point in a sincere sentence in her life. In July, I drove to Back Bay. There was a new doorman who did not know me and did not apologize when he told me he couldn't let me up. In August, I drove to Catskill, to the farmhouse, just to see it. It was still standing. Of course it was still standing. Stone and timber, and 14 years of weekend work don't disappear because a man in a cashmere sweater wants them to. The apple trees in the back were heavy with late summer fruit, and the porch swing moved slightly in the August breeze, and the whole place had the particular stillness of something waiting patiently for the right person to come back to it. I sat on the porch for an hour. I ate an apple from the tree nearest the fence. I drove back to Queens. I took out my notebook and I added a line. August 9th. House is fine. House is waiting. So am I. The call came at 2:17 in the morning on a Thursday in October. Unknown number. 4 seconds. "Mom. Catskill. Backstep. Flower pot. Help." The line went dead. I sat up in the dark of my bedroom and I did not waste a single second doubting what I had heard or what it meant. When you have been waiting for something for months, you recognize it the moment it arrives. Backstep. Flower pot. When Lily was 20 and I was deep in the renovation, she used to drive up on Friday evenings and sit on the back porch steps with a Coke and watch me work until it got dark. She had a habit of tucking her feet under the big blue ceramic pot I kept beside the bottom step, the pot I'd bought at a flea market in Kingston and planted with geraniums every spring. I had hidden a spare key under that pot during the renovation years. I had never told anyone except Lily. Not Roy, not the contractor, not Howard Finch. Just Lily, on a warm evening in August when she was 20 years old, and the house still smelled of sawdust and possibility. Everett Whitmore III did not know about that key, but my daughter did. I called Roy before I was out of bed. "Roy, get up, bring the truck." "Dot, it's 2 in the morning. She called, she's at the farmhouse. Something's wrong." A pause, the sound of blankets moving. "I'll be outside your building in 20 minutes, he said. Roy was outside in 18. We drove north through the dark with the heater running and the radio off. Roy didn't ask questions. That is one of the great virtues of my brother. He has spent 61 years learning which moments require words and which require silence, and the 2-hour drive up the thruway at 2:30 in the morning was one of the silent ones. I watched the highway lights blur past, and I kept my hands flat on my thighs, and I thought with the cold, focused clarity of a woman who has already done her grieving in advance and has nothing left to spend on panic. She's at the house. The house is hers. Whatever has happened, she is in a place that belongs to her. That thought was the only comfort I allowed myself. We turned onto Sycamore Ridge Road just before 5 in the morning. The sky was the particular dark that comes just before dawn starts. Not black anymore, but not light either. A deep blue-gray that feels like the world holding its breath. The farmhouse sat at the end of the gravel drive, dark and still. Everett's black SUV was parked on the road, 50 yards back, half hidden by the row of maples that lined the property. I saw it when Roy's headlights swept across it and I touched his arm. He cut the lights and we sat for a moment in the dark. "He's here," I said. "I see it," Roy said. His voice had gone very quiet. "He's been waiting for her to break," I said. "He brought her here because it's isolated, no neighbors close, no one to call." Roy nodded once. He reached behind the seat and picked up the heavy flashlight he kept back there, the industrial kind, solid as a club. He held it loosely at his side when he got out of the truck, and I noticed that he did not remark on this, and neither did I. We found the key under the flower pot exactly where I had left it, 10 years and a lifetime ago. The geraniums were dead, October, but the pot was still there, blue ceramic with a chip on the rim where I'd knocked it against the step in my second summer. The back door opened quietly. Inside, the house was cold. Not the ordinary cold of an empty house, the specific, deliberate cold of a place where the heat has been turned off intentionally, where the warmth has been removed as a policy. My breath made small clouds in the beam of Roy's flashlight. The kitchen was bare. A box of crackers on the counter, mostly empty. A single water glass by the sink. The refrigerator, when I opened it, contained 1 bottle of water and nothing else. He had brought her here, and he had taken away the heat, and he had taken away the food, and he had left her with crackers and water, and waited for her to decide that his terms were acceptable. My daughter, 7 months pregnant, in an October farmhouse with the heat turned off. I took a breath. I put the feeling somewhere small and locked and walked to the stairs. "Lily," my voice echoed off the plaster walls. From above, faint but immediate. "Mom." The door to the master bedroom was on the 2nd floor at the end of the hall, and it was locked, not from the inside. A heavy wooden bar had been mounted across the outside of the door frame, the kind of bar you see on old barn doors, new-looking, the wood still pale and unseasoned. Someone had installed it recently. Someone had installed it specifically for this purpose. Roy handed me the flashlight and put his shoulder against the door once, feeling it, the way a carpenter touches a joint before he decides where the weakness is. Then he stepped back and hit it hard, and the bar cracked at one end, and he hit it again, and the door swung open. Lily was in the corner of the room. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, wrapped in the heavy quilt from the bed, wearing her winter coat over what looked like several layers of clothing. Her face was white. Her lips were slightly chapped, the dehydration showing at the corners. A decorative candle, one of the small ones I kept on the windowsill, the kind you light in November when the light starts going, had burned down to a stub in a saucer beside her. The room smelled of cold and tallow. She was holding her belly with both hands. She looked up when the door opened, and the expression on her face in that moment, the way it moved from braced terror to fractured relief, is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Some things you don't describe. You just carry them. "Mom!" She tried to stand, and I was already across the room, already kneeling on the cold floor beside her, already gathering her in. She was shaking. The deep, involuntary kind of shaking that the body does when it has been cold and frightened for a very long time. "The baby," I said. "Lily, is the baby—" "Moving," she said against my shoulder. "She's moving," I counted. "She's okay. She, a daughter." I held Lily tighter. Roy stood in the doorway with his back to us, looking out into the dark hallway, and I could see from the set of his shoulders what it was costing him to stay calm. "He took my phone," Lily said. "He turned off the power. He said he wasn't going to come back until I signed the papers. He said—" She stopped. "He said this was my choice, that I was doing this to myself." "How long?" I said. Not a question. An inventory. 2 days, she said. 2 days. Isn't this sweet? The voice came from the doorway behind Roy. Easy, unbothered. The voice of a man who had calculated the odds before entering a room and liked what he found. Roy turned. Everett Whitmore III stood in the hall, and he looked exactly as he always looked. Perfect. Cashmere coat, gray, the expensive kind that doesn't wrinkle. Hair combed. A travel mug of coffee in his right hand, steam rising from the lid. He looked like a man who had slept well and had somewhere pleasant to be afterward. He must have been in the guest cottage out back, waiting, watching for lights, timing his entrance for maximum effect. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said pleasantly, "you're trespassing on private property." I stood up. I felt Lily's hand grab the back of my coat, brief and desperate, and then release me. "My daughter called me," I said. "She is 7 months pregnant. She has been locked in a room without heat or food for 2 days. What I am doing in this house is the only reasonable thing that any person with a conscience would do." "Lily was experiencing an episode," Everett said. and his tone was the tone of a very patient man explaining something to someone insufficiently intelligent to grasp it. She became irrational about the financial arrangements I proposed. I brought her somewhere quiet to allow her to calm down and think clearly. I was on the property the entire time. Nothing inappropriate occurred. You installed a bar on the outside of that door, I said. A safety modification, he said, given her state. She is not an animal in a stall, Everett. Something flickered in his face. The pleasantness thinned. Beneath it was something I had suspected for 2 years but never seen directly. A cold, flat contempt, not just for me but for the necessity of this conversation, for the existence of people who could not simply be managed into compliance. She is my wife, he said. And that, he nodded toward Lily's belly, is my child. You have no legal standing here. Neither does... He registered Roy for the first time. Roy was standing still. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, and he had spent 40 years doing physical labor, and he was holding the flashlight at his side in a loose, easy grip, and he was looking at Everett Whitmore III with the particular calm expression of a man who has seen a great deal of the world and is not impressed by any part of this particular corner of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Everett looked at Roy, looked at the flashlight, looked back at Roy's face. The mask didn't drop. It didn't need to. What happened was smaller than that and more revealing. A faint tightening around the eyes, a microsecond of recalculation, the almost imperceptible adjustment of a man who had just updated his model of the situation and found it less favorable than he'd expected. The arrogance was still there, but underneath it, for the first time in 2 years, I saw what had always been underneath it. A small, cold fear. Fine, he said. The pleasantness was gone now, just the cold, clean edges of him. Take her. She's made her position clear. But you will be hearing from my attorneys before this day is over, and when you do, I would encourage you to think very carefully about your financial situation, Mrs. Hargrove, because I promise you— Everett, I said. He stopped. Save it, I said. You're going to need every word of it for the criminal attorney. I put my arm around Lily. Roy moved to her other side. We walked past Everett in the hallway and down the stairs and out through the kitchen and into the cold October dawn, and he did not follow us, and he did not speak again. Outside, the sky had shifted while we were inside. The blue-gray had opened into something pale and definite in the east. Not full light yet, but the honest promise of it, the sky doing what it does every morning without apology or permission. Roy helped Lily into the back seat of the truck. I climbed in beside her. She leaned against me, and I felt the shaking slowly begin to subside, degree by degree, as the truck warmed and Roy drove, and the farmhouse with its cold rooms and its terrible installed bar and its man in a cashmere coat grew smaller in the rear window and then disappeared entirely. Lily's hand found mine in the dark of the back seat. I kept counting, she said quietly. Every time I got scared, I counted the kicks. She kept moving. She never stopped moving. She's stubborn, I said. Lily made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the cousin of one. Wonder where she gets that. Roy drove north to Albany, and I held my daughter's hand, and outside the windows the Hudson Valley came slowly, golden and ordinary, into the October morning light. And I thought about Gerald, who would have wept in the front seat and also driven faster. And I thought about Howard Finch and his vault of a trust. And I thought about the notebook in my kitchen drawer in Queens where I had been recording dates and times for 11 months. October 14th, I would write when I got home. She called. I came. The house was waiting. Albany Medical Center was bright and warm and smelled of industrial cleaner and coffee from the vending machine in the hallway. Dr. Patricia Owens was the attending physician. She was around 50, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the particular directness of someone who has spent decades cutting through what people want to say to get to what they need to say. She examined Lily thoroughly. She ordered fluids and warming blankets and an ultrasound, and she sat with the results for a long moment before she spoke. Baby looks good, she said. Strong heartbeat. Good movement. You got her here in time. The her stopped me, briefly, with something enormous I didn't have a name for. Mrs. Whitmore, doctor, Owens said, and her voice was careful in the way that professional voices go careful when they are about to step onto important ground. I need to ask you some questions about how you came to be in the conditions we found you in. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to, but I need you to know that anything you tell me can be documented. Officially. With a timestamp and my signature. Lily looked at me. I nodded. She told Dr. Owens everything. Doctor. Owens wrote steadily the entire time, her pen moving across the chart in her small, dense handwriting. When Lily finished, Dr. Owens set down her pen and looked at us both over her reading glasses for a long moment. I'm going to document all of this as thoroughly as I know how, she said. Malnutrition, dehydration, hypothermia, mild. Bruising to the left wrist, consistent with forceful gripping, approximately 72 hours old. She looked directly at Lily. This documentation will exist permanently, she said. Whatever decisions you make going forward, it will be there. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, Lily said. And for the first time all morning, her voice was completely steady. Howard Finch answered his phone on the second ring at 7:45 in the morning. When I told him where we were and what had happened, there was a silence, and then the sound of a man pushing his chair back from a desk. I'll have an emergency protective order application filed by noon, he said. Get me Dr. Owens' direct contact and I'll call her myself. Howard, Dorothy, this is what the vault is for. The temporary restraining order came through in less than 24 hours. Everett's attorney called Howard within 3 hours of the filing. Howard described the call to me later in a single word. Rattled, he said, and for the first time in 11 months, I allowed myself to believe that the walls were going to hold. The divorce was not a battle. I want to be precise about this, because the word battle implies two sides of roughly comparable strength meeting in a defined space with agreed-upon rules. What the Whitmore family unleashed when the protective order was served was not a battle. It was an attempt at erasure, systematic, well-funded, and conducted by people who did this professionally and had never lost to someone like me. They sent 4 attorneys. Howard Finch sent one, himself. I cashed out my retirement account on a Tuesday morning in November, sitting at my kitchen table in Queens with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and the phone on speaker while the account representative walked me through the early withdrawal penalties in the careful tone of someone who suspects they are participating in a mistake. I let him finish. I confirmed the transfer. I hung up, and I did not look at the number again, because the number was not the point. The number was just money, and money is just a tool, and the tool was needed. Roy called that evening. Somehow he always knows. Dot, you okay? I'm fine, I said. I've got $40,000 in savings, he said. It's yours. Roy, Dorothy Ann Hargrove, he said, which is the name he uses when he is not interested in an argument. That little girl in that cold room is my niece. You take the money. I took the money. The Whitmore legal strategy arrived in 3 coordinated waves, the way you'd expect from people who had been winning by overwhelming force for so many generations that improvisation had become unnecessary. The first wave targeted the trust. Their lead attorney, a man named Bradford Holt, whose letterhead included 4 prestigious firm names and whose hourly rate was more than I earned in a week, argued that the trust had been established with demonstrable fraudulent intent, designed specifically to deprive Everett Whitmore of rightful access to marital assets. Howard filed the timeline. Trust created April, 2 years before the engagement. Notarized, witnessed, properly recorded. The argument collapsed before it reached the judge's desk. Bradford Holt moved on without acknowledging this, the way glaciers move, slowly, without apology, in a new direction. The second wave targeted Lily. A psychiatric evaluation was requested, filed on the grounds that her erratic behavior, by which they meant leaving her husband, pressing charges, and refusing to return, demonstrated instability incompatible with primary parenthood. The evaluator they proposed had consulted for the Whitmore Family Foundation twice in the previous decade. The judge, the Honorable Eleanor Marsh, who had silver hair and reading glasses and the expression of a woman who had presided over enough family court proceedings to have developed a finely calibrated contempt for manipulation, denied the proposed evaluator and appointed her own. The court-appointed psychologist spent 6 hours with Lily over 2 sessions. Her report, filed 3 weeks later, was 22 pages long. I read all of it. The clinical language was careful and measured, and the conclusion was unambiguous. Lily Hargrove Whitmore was a woman of sound mind and stable character who had experienced a prolonged pattern of coercive control and was demonstrating appropriate and healthy responses to an objectively harmful situation. Bradford Holt received the report and filed a motion to exclude it. Judge Marsh denied the motion in 4 sentences, the last of which contained the phrase, "without merit," and nothing further. The third wave came for me. My finances were subpoenaed. 30 years of tax returns, bank statements, business records. They were looking for irregularities. Anything that could be used to suggest that the trust had been funded improperly, that I had hidden income, that there was something questionable in the accounting of a woman who had spent 3 decades making sure other people's accounting was unquestionable. They found nothing. Of course they found nothing. I am an accountant. My records are the most boring documents in the state of New York. Bradford Holt moved on to the 4th wave, which was not in the original strategy, but which desperation sometimes generates. He began suggesting in filings and in hallway conversations that Howard reported back to me that I was the true instigating party in the dissolution of the Whitmore marriage, that I had systematically poisoned Lily against her husband, that the trust, the postcard, the midnight rescue, all of it was the orchestration of a controlling, jealous mother who could not accept her daughter's marriage into a superior social class. Howard asked me the evening before the trial began whether any of this was getting to me. I thought about it honestly. No, I said, because none of it is about me. It's about Lily, and it's about that little girl she's carrying. Everything else is just noise. Howard was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, in 31 years, I've had a lot of clients. You're in the top 3. Top 3 what? People I'd want in my corner, he said. Go get some sleep, Dorothy. Virginia Whitmore took the stand on the 3rd day of trial. She had been called by Bradford Holt as a character witness. The plan, as Howard explained it to me the night before, was for Virginia to establish the Whitmore family as a pillar of Boston society and Lily as a destabilizing interloper who had never truly fit, had never truly tried, and had ultimately demonstrated her unsuitability by betraying the family's trust. Virginia walked to the witness stand with her spine straight and her Chanel suit immaculate, and her face wearing the serene authority of a woman who has never in her life doubted that the room would arrange itself according to her preferences. Bradford Holt walked her through it carefully. The Whitmore family history, the charitable work, the generations of contribution to Boston society. Everett's character, reliable, devoted, a man whose only failing was perhaps caring too deeply about the proper order of things. Lily's difficulties, the trouble adjusting, the emotional volatility, the unfortunate influence of an overbearing mother. Virginia answered each question with the measured fluency of a woman who has been carefully briefed. She did not look at Lily. She did not look at me. She looked at Bradford Holt and at the judge with the composed certainty of someone who has never needed to look anywhere else. Bradford Holt sat down. Lily's attorney, Sandra Voss, stood up. Sandra Voss was 51 years old and 5 feet 2 inches tall and had been practicing family law for 24 years. She wore suits in dark, precise colors, and she spoke in a voice that was never loud and never hurried, and that had a quality I recognized from the best accountants I had known. The quality of someone who has done the arithmetic 3 times before they open their mouth and is not surprised by anything the numbers say. She approached the witness stand with a single manila folder. Mrs. Whitmore, she said pleasantly, thank you for being here. Virginia inclined her head, gracious, accustomed to being thanked. At the wedding reception last September, Sandra said, you presented your daughter-in-law with a gift, a Victorian maid's apron and a copy of a household management manual published in 1923. Is that correct? It is, Virginia said. It was a family tradition, a family tradition, Sandra said in the tone of someone making a note. Thank you. I'd like to ask you about another family tradition, if I may. She opened the manila folder. Mrs. Whitmore, in March of 1987, you filed for divorce from your husband, Everett Whitmore II, in Suffolk County Probate and Family Court. Is that correct? The first crack appeared. Small, visible only because I was watching for it. A fractional stillness, the stillness of a person who has just stepped onto ice they thought was solid and felt it shift beneath them. That filing was withdrawn, Virginia said. Her voice was still level, still controlled. It was, Sandra agreed, 6 weeks after it was submitted. But the original filing is a matter of public record. And in that filing, Mrs. Whitmore, you described your situation in your own words. You wrote, she looked down at the document, that your husband exercised complete control over your finances, systematically isolated you from your family and friends, and made you feel, and I am quoting directly, "like a servant in my own home, invisible and without recourse." The courtroom was very quiet. Virginia's face did something I had never seen it do. It did not harden, and it did not crumble. It did something more complicated and more painful than either. It opened briefly like a door blown ajar by an unexpected wind, showing for just a moment the room behind it, the room that had been locked for 36 years. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sandra said, and her voice was quieter now, almost gentle, in the way that precise things can be gentle. "At Lily Hargrove's wedding, you gave your daughter-in-law a maid's apron and told her not to forget her place. In 1987, you yourself described feeling like a servant in your home. My question is this: was the gift at the wedding a tradition, or was it a lesson you learned so completely that you stopped being able to see it as a wound?" Bradford Holt was on his feet with an objection. Judge Marsh sustained it, but the question was already in the room. Objections can strike testimony from the record. They cannot strike it from the air. Virginia looked at her son for the first time since taking the stand. Everett Whitmore III was looking at his phone. Something moved across Virginia's face. A long, slow movement, like a tide going out, withdrawing from a shore it had covered for so long that the shore had forgotten what it looked like uncovered. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Marsh said, in a voice that was not unkind, "the court is still waiting." "I know," Virginia said. She did not say anything else for a long moment. The room waited. "I don't know," she finally said. Her voice was very quiet, almost no authority left in it, just the voice without the architecture. "I don't know anymore." Judge Eleanor Marsh delivered her ruling on a Friday morning in December, 2 weeks before Christmas, in a courtroom that smelled of old wood and central heating. She spoke for 11 minutes without notes. She described what she had observed in the evidence, a pattern of behavior that met the legal and clinical definition of coercive control. The financial monitoring, the social isolation, the weaponizing of pregnancy to accelerate compliance, the deliberate creation of conditions, a cold room, a locked door, the removal of food and warmth and communication, designed to break a person's will. She was precise, and she was thorough, and she did not raise her voice once. "This court," she said, "does not accept the argument that what occurred at 18 Sycamore Ridge Road on the nights of October 12th and 13th was a private marital matter. A pregnant woman was confined without heat, food, or means of communication for approximately 48 hours. The bar installed on the exterior of that door was not a safety modification. It was a lock. The court will treat it as such." She paused. She looked at Everett Whitmore III over her reading glasses with an expression that contained, I thought, a very old and very patient disappointment. Not surprise, because Judge Marsh had clearly stopped being surprised by men like Everett long ago, but disappointment, the way a person who still believes in the possibility of decency is disappointed when they encounter its specific absence. Then she read the terms. Lily was awarded primary physical custody of the child. Everett would receive supervised visitation, once monthly, at a location approved by the court. The arrangement would be reviewed in 2 years. The trust stood, inviolable, exactly as Howard had built it. The farmhouse at 18 Sycamore Ridge Road belonged to Lily, completely and permanently, and no argument Bradford Holt had made in 3 days of trial had put so much as a scratch on it. Child support was set at a figure that meant Lily would not need to ask anyone for anything. What the court could not do, what the law, with all its weight and all its language, was unable to accomplish, was hold Everett criminally accountable. His attorneys had argued successfully that he had remained on the property, that no physical violence had occurred, that the bar on the door was a safety precaution, installed with what he characterized as genuine concern for his wife's well-being. The argument was absurd, and everyone in the room knew it was absurd, and it was enough. The law is not a perfect instrument. I have known this for 30 years. It is a blunt, heavy tool that does tremendous good and leaves tremendous gaps, and what falls into the gaps depends enormously on how much money you have to push with. Everett walked out of that courtroom with his freedom and most of his fortune, and Bradford Holt at his elbow, already talking about appeals. But Lily walked out with her daughter. She stopped on the courthouse steps and turned her face up into the December sky, which was the pale, washed-out blue of winter without apology, and she closed her eyes and stood there for just a moment, perfectly still, and I stood beside her and did not say anything, because some moments do not need words, and this was one of them. Roy was waiting at the bottom of the steps with the truck running and the heat on. "Well," he said. "We won what matters," I said. He looked at Lily. She opened her eyes and looked back at him, and she nodded. Roy pressed his lips together and turned away quickly and made a show of checking something in the truck bed that did not need checking. Thomas Gerald Whitmore was born in February at Albany Medical Center, in the same wing where Dr. Patricia Owens had documented his mother's injuries 4 months earlier. He weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces and had Lily's red hair, already a definite color, and his great-uncle Roy's large, serious hands. He came into the world at 6:14 in the morning, which is my favorite time of day, the time when it has just become undeniably light. Lily named him Thomas for no particular reason except that she had always loved the name, and Gerald for every particular reason there was. I held him in the recovery room while Lily slept, and I looked at his face for a long time. The new face, unwritten, full of every possibility. And I thought about Gerald, who had held Lily exactly this way in a different hospital room 29 years ago, and looked at her with the expression of a man who has just understood something enormous. "I see it now, Gerald," I thought. "I see what you saw." The letter arrived 6 weeks after Thomas was born. It came in a cream-colored envelope with no printed return address, just a handwritten address in the upper left corner, 18 Lewisburg Square, Boston, Massachusetts. The handwriting was very controlled and very precise. The handwriting of a woman who had been told repeatedly in childhood that presentation mattered, and who had internalized the lesson so completely she could no longer separate it from herself. I opened it at the kitchen table in Queens, alone, on a Tuesday morning in March. It was 4 pages, handwritten on cream stationery with a small engraved W at the top. I recognized the quality of the paper before I read a word. The kind of paper that costs more than most people's grocery budget because it is thick and smooth and made to last. Virginia had written on it with a fountain pen, dark blue ink, in the careful script of a woman who considered careless handwriting a form of rudeness. She did not begin with an apology. I noted this immediately, and I took it as a sign of honesty, because Virginia Whitmore was not a woman who apologized, not from cruelty, but from a fundamental incapacity, the way some people cannot carry a tune. What she offered instead was rarer, in its way, and harder. She offered an explanation. She wrote about her own marriage, not the public version, not the charitable galas and the Lewisburg Square dinner parties, and the Whitmore family presented as a unified monument to Boston propriety, the private version. The one that had existed behind the closed doors of 38 years of a marriage to a man who had systematically, methodically, and without ever raising his voice, made her smaller and smaller until she fit exactly the space he had decided was appropriate for her. She wrote about the filing in 1987, how she had driven herself to the courthouse on a Thursday morning in March, 36 years ago, with her hands shaking on the steering wheel and a clarity she described as the most frightening thing I had ever felt, because it was real and it was mine and I did not know what would happen to it. She wrote about the 6 weeks that followed, the pressure, the attorneys, the careful, loving dismantling of her resolve. The moment she withdrew the filing, not because she stopped believing she was right, but because she could not see from inside the life she was living how to get from where she was to somewhere else without losing everything she also needed to survive. She wrote, "I told myself I had made a strategic decision, that I was protecting my children, that there was a way to manage the situation from the inside that would be better, in the long run, than the destruction of leaving. I told myself this for 36 years. I became very good at believing it. And then, the paragraph I read 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with the tea going cold. At the wedding, when I gave Lily that apron, I believed I was preparing her. I believed that if she learned quickly, if she understood the architecture of the life she was entering, she would survive it the way I survived it. I did not see until Sandra Voss asked me her question in that courtroom that what I was actually doing was recruiting her into the same captivity I had built my life around. I had spent so long making peace with my cage that I had begun to mistake it for a home. And when I saw a young woman who still had the chance to choose differently, my instinct was not to open the door for her. It was to close it. Because an open door, after 36 years, is not a relief. It is an accusation. I set the letter down. I looked out my kitchen window at the February sky over Queens. I picked the letter back up and read the last page. Virginia wrote that 6 weeks before the trial, she had contacted Sandra Voss. Not because she had experienced a transformation, she was careful to say, not because she had become a different person or arrived at a new philosophy, but because she had looked at the file Sandra was building, and she had seen what was missing, and she had known where it was. She had provided the 1987 court documents herself. She had known they would be used against her on the stand. She had let it happen. "I could not undo what I did at the wedding," she wrote. "I could not give Lily back the months she spent frightened in that apartment, or the nights she spent cold in that farmhouse. I could not make my son into a different man, but I could give Sandra Voss a weapon, and I could walk into that courtroom and I could take the hit. It was the only useful thing I had left to offer." "You gave your daughter a house," the letter ended. "I spent 40 years making sure there was no door in mine. I think that is the difference between us, Mrs. Hargrove, and I think it is not a small one. I am not asking for your forgiveness or your understanding. I am simply telling you that you were right, and that it cost me something to know it, and that I believe the cost was fair." No closing, just her signature. Virginia Aldridge Whitmore. Her maiden name restored to the middle, where it had apparently always been waiting. I sat at the table for a long time. I thought about the woman who had stood in that ballroom in her white Chanel suit and handed my daughter a maid's apron with a smile of serene authority. I thought about the girl she must have been before that woman, the girl who had driven herself to a courthouse in March 1987 with shaking hands and a terrifying clarity. I did not forgive Virginia. Forgiveness is a specific thing, a transaction between specific parties, and the person Virginia had most wronged was Lily, and that was not my transaction to make. But I understood her, completely and without comfort, the way you understand a thing that has no good resolution, only the truth of how it happened. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the cream envelope. I put the envelope in the drawer of my kitchen table, beneath the spiral notebook where I had been recording dates and times for 11 months. I did not tell Lily about it. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Perhaps someday, when Thomas was old enough to ask questions about his family that deserved honest answers, and Lily was ready to hear them. Some truths keep. You put them somewhere safe and you let them wait. 3 years have passed since that October morning when I drove north through the dark with Roy and found my daughter in a cold room with a burned-down candle and her hands on her belly, counting kicks. I live in the guest cottage now. It was Roy's idea, and it was a good one. The cottage is small, 2 rooms, a bathroom, a kitchen the size of a generous closet, and it sits 50 yards from the main house at the edge of the apple orchard. And in the mornings I can see the light come up over the Catskill Hills from the window above the kitchen sink, which I consider an entirely adequate reason to be alive. Lily runs her editing consultancy from the porch of the main house. She built it slowly, the way you build anything real, client by client, word by word, with the patience of someone who has learned that sustainable things don't sprint. She has 6 regular clients now and a waiting list, and she works in jeans and her father's old flannel shirt with her red hair loose and her feet bare on the porch boards in summer, and she looks, when she is working, like a person who has found the exact right shape for her life. Thomas is 3 years old and is currently engaged in the serious project of learning to climb everything. He has Lily's red hair, my husband Gerald's kind eyes, and Roy's hands, those large, capable, unhurrying hands that seem to belong to someone older and are somehow, on a 3-year-old, entirely his own. He calls Roy Uncle Roy and follows him around the property on Saturday mornings with a small plastic tool belt strapped around his waist, deeply invested in every repair and renovation Roy undertakes. Everett comes once a month for his supervised visit. He arrives in a different vehicle each time. The cars have gotten progressively more expensive, as if the escalation is a message I am meant to decode, and he spends 2 hours with Thomas in the yard with a family court supervisor present, and he brings gifts that are always too sophisticated for a 3-year-old, and always have the quality of objects selected by someone who does not know the child they are selecting them for. Thomas is polite to his father the way children are polite to strangers they have been taught to be kind to. He answers questions and accepts gifts and returns to his plastic tool belt as soon as it seems socially permissible. Children understand more than we tell them. They always have. Virginia died 14 months ago, in the house on Lewisburg Square. She had been unwell for some time. Her heart, which had always been the complicated center of things, had grown complicated in a medical sense as well. Everett was with her at the end, which I thought was right, whatever else was true about him. She had been his mother. I did not attend the service. I sent flowers, white peonies, which I thought she would have approved of, and I sat for a while in the garden of the farmhouse that afternoon, and thought about the letter in my kitchen drawer, and the girl who had driven to a courthouse in March 1987, and the woman she had become, and the choice she had made in a courtroom at the end of her life. She let them use the weapon, I thought. It was the bravest thing she ever did. It was a Saturday in September when Lily sat down beside me on the porch swing and told me about the deed. Thomas was in the yard, conducting an investigation of the apple orchard with the focused intensity of a scientist who suspects the trees may be hiding something. The light was the September light of the Hudson Valley, gold and horizontal and specific, the kind of light that makes everything look like it has been waiting its whole life to be seen clearly. "Mom," Lily said, "I want to change something in the trust." I looked at her. "I want to add Tommy," she said, "when he's grown, and I want to add a clause." "What kind of clause?" She looked out at the orchard where Thomas had found something in the grass and was examining it with grave scientific attention. "If he ever has a partner," she said, "a spouse, a partner, whoever they are, I want them to have their own piece, their own deed, their own name on their own piece of land. Not Whitmore land, not Hargrove land, their land." I was quiet for a moment. "So that no one in this family," she continued, "ever has to wonder whether they have somewhere to go. So that no one who loves someone in this family ever has to earn their security by passing a test they didn't know they were taking." The September light moved through the apple trees. Thomas had stood up from his investigation and was now walking back toward the house with something cupped in his hands. A caterpillar, probably, or a smooth stone, or one of the 1,000 ordinary miracles that 3-year-olds carry to their mothers as offerings. I thought about the deed in the blue envelope that I had carried across a ballroom floor 3 years ago. I thought about Gerald, who would have understood immediately and completely what his daughter was proposing, because it was exactly the kind of thing he would have proposed himself. I thought about Virginia's letter, still in the kitchen drawer, still waiting. I thought about the girl who had driven to a courthouse in 1987, and the girl who had been locked in a cold room in October, and the girl who was now sitting beside me on a porch swing in September, looking out at her son and her land and her life. 3 women, 3 locked doors. One of them opened it herself and then forgot it was a door. One of them needed someone else to break it down. And one, this one, mine, the one with her father's eyes and my stubbornness, was building a house where the doors opened from the inside. "That sounds exactly right," I said. Thomas reached the porch steps and held up his cupped hands with the solemnity of a small person bearing important news. "Mama," he said. "Bug." "I see it, baby," Lily said, leaning forward. "What kind of bug?" Thomas examined it with the authority of someone whose 3 years of experience are entirely sufficient. "A good bug," he said. Lily laughed, her real laugh, the one I had missed for 2 years and thought sometimes I might never hear again. The one that comes from somewhere below strategy and performance and self-protection, from the place in a person where they are simply, completely themselves. It filled the porch. It moved out into the yard and up through the apple trees and into the September air, and it was the most ordinary sound in the world and the most extraordinary, and it hung there for a moment in the golden light before it became part of the afternoon, which became part of the day, which became part of the life she was building here, board by board, word by word, season by season. The way you build anything that lasts. I reached over and put my hand on the wooden arm of the porch swing. The swing Roy had built in the second summer, sanded smooth and hung level despite the slight warp in the beam above it, adjusted and readjusted until it hung true. Not perfect, but solid. Steady in the way of things that have been built with attention and have earned their place. We often think that love means merging, that it means becoming so intertwined that the boundary between self and other disappears, and that this disappearance is the proof and the measure of the love. I have come to believe the opposite. I think the deepest love, the love that saves people, that travels with them through the worst rooms of the worst years and is still standing on the other side, is the love that says, "You are a separate person, fully, and I will do whatever is required to make sure you can always be." I had given my daughter a house. She had turned it into a home. And now she was making sure that home would never be the kind that locks. "That sounds exactly right," I had said. And it did. It still does. It will.